We have Clippers, Mavs, Game 1, Sixers, Wizards tomorrow at 1 o'clock, and the NBA playoffs are right here to get into all of that and more. Joining us right now on the Boardwalk Kinda Hotline here on 97.3 ESPN, Jonathan Von Tobel. He is the host of the Hardwood Handicapers podcast, ESPN Las Vegas radio host here on 97.3 ESPN. Joining us, Jonathan, how you doing today?
I'm good, man. Covering the NBA for VSiN. It's the 72-game regular season, 82-game regular season. They're fun. I enjoy it, I think, more often than not. But by the time you get here, you're ready for it to all get going. So I'm pretty excited.
Yeah, it felt like the play-in tournament was only like a tiny appetizer. It's like, you go to that restaurant, you think, oh, this appetizer looks great. And then it comes out to you, it's like this small. And you're like, what did I spend all that money for? It felt like that was what the play-in tournament was a bit.
Yeah. No, and look, we got some good ones, right? So you got a good couple of nuggets out of it. You got that Lakers and Warriors game, which lived up, I think, to the hype. The Spurs-Grizzlies game before that was great. And I thought last night was a lot of fun, too, between the Grizzlies and the Warriors. So you got some pretty good, solid action out of it. But now we're ready for the real thing. And it's going to be great over the next few months to see this play out.
Absolutely. So let's run down the schedule in terms of chronology, and we'll get to the Sixers-Wizards game, which our audience is very interested. But I got to start with this. The first game today, Miami and Milwaukee. This game fascinates me because Miami, we know they got to the finals last year, but that was in the bubble. Milwaukee, they've been to the playoffs multiple times, haven't broken through to the NBA finals. You got a two-time league MVP, a former coach of the year. Can Milwaukee exercise the demons and beat Miami?
So I think they can, right? I think one of the fatal flaws that the analysis around this series is, hey, these two teams met last year and we know what happened, so the same is likely to happen again, right? But, the line I keep using is these are the same franchises. These are not the same teams. The Miami Heat of this year are not the second best three-point shooting team like they were last year. The Miami Heat this year do not get to play Milwaukee, as you mentioned, on a neutral court every single one of these contests. Now, they have to go to Milwaukee to take on the Bucks for a couple of these games. Home court does make a difference. Travel does make a slight difference. And the biggest change in terms of all of those things we talk about, neutral court to home court, not the same shooting team, you're not getting the same bang for the buck that you were on the series price. Remember, last year you were getting nearly 4-1 on the Miami Heat to win this series against the Milwaukee Bucks. This year, it's under $3. And so, that's the kind of differences you got to look at in terms of a betting perspective, why you would be looking at one side or the other. And I think Milwaukee is going to move on here because out of all the issues that the Bucks have, 29th in terms of perimeter defense, right? Opponents, the second worst shooting rate from beyond the arc against them. I don't trust Miami offensively. They've been consistently bad all year long, 19th in three-point shooting. I just don't know if they can exploit the issues that Milwaukee has. So I think I think the honor rests in Brooklyn's favor to do that. So I think the Bucks move on in about 6 or 7 games here.
Well, for Brooklyn, that might be an issue as well because we saw that the Bucks can give them problems. They have the athletes to maybe give them a little trouble. And we know the Nets basically play zero defense. The Bucks play enough defense. So even if the Bucks get out of the first round and beat the Heat, it's not like the Nets series is going to be easy for either of those teams. That could be a 7-game series there.
Yeah, that'll be a tight series. I would say, though, you look, and you're talking to a very big James Harden stan right now. Before he went down for the hamstring injury, had a ticket on him to win MVP. It was very much, pimping his resume out there. I think Harden makes all the difference in the world, right? We saw those 2 games that these two teams played. I think it was 2 weeks ago or so when Milwaukee took 2 from Brooklyn. James Harden changes everything in that dynamic, right? He's somebody who can give them a consistent presence within 4 feet of the basket in that floater range. He's not as much of a jump shooter as Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant are. He's a ball dominant type of guy. He changes the entire aspect of it. And I would say one thing about Brooklyn, it's very true, right? Statistically, they're a poor defense, 21st in terms of defensive efficiency on the season, but very quietly, when these three are on the floor together, according to Cleaning the Glass, their defensive rating is actually better than Boston's than it was this year. It's 111. It's not abhorrent, right? It's not like, hey, you're just going to get whatever you want against this type of team. And that's going to help them, I think, in the long run. But overall, their floor, not even their ceiling, their floor, Brooklyn, is so high offensively that any one of these teams, especially a Milwaukee team that just can't stop teams from beyond the arc, they're going to have a tough time. So I would think that, it's going to be a tight series. Off the top of my head, given everything that they're going to be healthy, I think it'll be about a 6-game series in favor of the Brooklyn Nets. But I'm very high on Brooklyn with Harden on the floor.
See, and that's why I understand what you're saying. See, I'm with you on the Harden thing. You could argue Harden is the most important player for the Nets because when he's on the floor, at least he can elevate people around him in ways that just Kyrie can't, right? But my problem with the Nets is, and this is why I don't want to say I'm a Nets hater, but I'm a Nets doubter. And that is, you got Durant, Harden, soft tissue injuries, hamstrings. What if that creeps up? What if Kyrie has another personal issue in his life? He decides to just bail in the middle of a series. My concern with the Nets is, I don't know if all three of those guys are going to be there every night. And I feel like if Harden misses any time in these playoffs, this team is just doomed.
Yeah, I mean, no, those are all fair, right? We came into this the postseason is 8-9 games that they have played together. All of them, the soft tissue injuries. Now, it does seem like with the Kyrie thing, it seems like yes, well, he's had his comments and his time off. That it seems like the playoffs are something of his focal point at this point right now. Of course, Kyrie is an enigma. We have no idea how he's going to handle it. But I just operate under the assumption until they're not there that they're going to be there, right? And so when you look at them all together, that's going to be really strong. But I've made this comparison before, and I wouldn't slight anybody who thinks it. You know, they are in danger of potentially being the Clippers of last year. Remember, Paul George and Kawhi Leonard didn't really play together. They go to the bubble. Lou Williams gets suspended. Montrezl Harrell is not there because of a death in his family. Patrick Beverley gets injured, so Reggie Jackson has to play a lot of those minutes. Like, they weren't really ready for that bubble situation. What happened? Tough series against the Dallas Mavericks. They lose that 3-1 series lead to Denver. And there is a chance that the Nets could potentially be that team with the lack of continuity. So I would not slight anybody who sits there and tells me, no, like, I can't believe in it because of X, Y, and Z and what we've seen. It's completely understandable.
Jonathan Von Tobel joining us here on the Boardwalk Kind of Hotline here on 97.3 ESPN at me, JVT, on Twitter. He is the host of the Hardwood Handicapers podcast. Also, he's a host on ESPN Las Vegas Radio. John, let's go to the other two series that start today here on 97.3 ESPN FM. Mavs, Clippers, coming up 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Can the Clippers live up to expectations this year compared to their struggles last year?
So I think they can. You know, I think very quietly, and I would say, you know, I guess take this with a grain of salt. They were my team to come out of the Western Conference a year ago, and I, of course, fell short a little bit with that 3-1 series lead blown. But I think when you look at this team in the second half, Josh, like when you see what they have done, they have really regressed positively defensively. Remember in the first half, they were about 19th, 21st in defensive efficiency. But one of my favorite little nuggets that you can dig up when you look at some of those, the NBA has great tracking data. In the first half, they're actually one of the league leaders in terms of tightly contested shots on defense, but they were one of the bottom teams in terms of field goal percentage on those looks. So essentially, they're getting to their spots, but opponents are still knocking those down. That has regressed to the mean fantastically for this team. In the second half, since the All-Star break, top 5 offense, top 5 defense. They are the best three-point shooting team in the league, right? First across the board, whether it's overall three-point shooting, non-corner three-point shooting, corner three-point shooting. Rajon Rondo has changed them a little bit offensively. Their frequency of attempts at the rim have gone up quite a bit. They were 26th in the first half. They're 15th in the second half. Like, what I like so much about them is they have addressed the issues that they have had from a personnel standpoint, and they've improved statistically in the areas of the floor in which they were really struggling in the first half. And they're finally healthy, right? Serge Ibaka missed a good chunk of games. He comes back near the end of the regular season. Kawhi Leonard and Paul George surpassed the amount of possessions they played together well in the middle of the season that were last year, so they've already got better continuity. And when they're on the floor together, they've been absolutely spectacular. So I think they can finally kind of deliver on everything we expected, and we at least get that Western Conference Finals matchup we were hoping for between them and the Los Angeles Lakers. And in a series like this, Doncic is a really good player. But the one thing that sticks out to you when you evaluate the Dallas Mavericks, when he's on the floor, a historic offensive rating of 118.3, but they're barely outscoring their opponents by 3 points every 100 possessions because their defense has been so bad. And, like, that's the problem with Dallas. I thought the last game of the regular season was a microcosm of the Mavericks, right, where you just give up everything defensively to the Minnesota Timberwolves and end up losing that game. It's not going to fly against a team like the Los Angeles Clippers. So I think this has the potential to be a relatively quick series, like Clippers in 5.
Yeah, the thing with the Mavericks is that, I mean, first of all, you're right. They probably, in every metric, they have a worse defense than the Nets have this year. And when I think about the Mavericks as well, it's like Rick Carlisle defenses are better than this, right? Rick Carlisle has a history of being a pretty good defensive coach, and it seems like this roster was built around Luka maybe the wrong way. They were leaning too far in one direction, and I think that's what can bite them here.
Yeah, and look, and I have my common theme when evaluating teams is if your perimeter defense is poor, then I'm just not really going to value a lot in the big picture. It's why I'm kind of down on Milwaukee in the big picture, and it's why I'm down on Dallas. Season long wise, I think they're like 17th in opponent three-point shooting. But if you look in the second half, specifically above the break three-point shooting, would tend to be non-assisted threes. They're like 24th. Like they just haven't really been good from beyond the arc. And those are the kind of issues that when you're talking about best of 7 series, especially against teams that have elite wing players, right? Like Paul George, like Kawhi Leonard, like those teams are going to get you. And even in that, that bubble series last year, one of the games they stole was because Reggie Jackson actually kind of switched on to Luka Doncic and he buries a step back three that was like 30 feet long and they eventually win that game. I think this is one where the Clippers are going to be able, they've been very vocal about the way they've handled things. They clearly have a better vibe in the locker room. Remember Montrezl Harrell and all of them. I just think this sets up this year a lot better for them than it would be a year ago.
Let's go to this series, the last one of the night, 10:30 tonight. This is the series I'm most excited for in the Western Conference. Portland versus Denver, Dame time versus Jokic. I mean, there's so many storylines to go with here. I'm personally just going to hit the over on this series every single game, whether it wins or not. I'm just going to hit the over no matter what. I feel like this is just going to be so entertaining, and it's going to be a real test of, whose flaws are going to be less of a problem, right? It's going to be Portland's lack of interior defense and, well, really anything at this point outside of Nurkic versus a team in the Nuggets, which I think are going to miss Jamal Murray maybe a little more than people realize.
Right. You're absolutely right. And I think this is very fascinating for multiple reasons. You have hit on one of my issues with Portland, though, and it's a common thing with me. It's funny. We talk about like the general conversation around the league is, defense doesn't matter anymore. Well, it does, right? The Portland Trailblazers are the 29th ranked defense in the NBA. They're the worst defensive team among all of them in the postseason at this point right now in terms of just overall defensive efficiency. That's not going to get you very far, and especially when your defense and where it lacks is on the inside, right? The most optimal shot in the NBA is not the three-point shot. It's within 4 feet of the basket. And so when you have an edge that the Nuggets do in the front court, right? Because both of these teams have inherent edges. The Portland Trailblazers have a much better backcourt with CJ McCollum and Damian Lillard, but the Denver Nuggets have a much better front court with Michael Porter Jr., Aaron Gordon, and Nikola Jokic. So how that weighs in terms of the big picture is going to be fascinating. And by the way, it's not just Jamal Murray, right? We know that. Well, Barton is injured as well. Monte Morris has been banged up, but he's back on the floor. But we know we're going to get Barton back at some point. I know I have the inherent advantage there with the Denver Nuggets. I think the market kind of overreacted here a little bit in making Portland the favorite in this series when they don't have home court, when they have that flaw on the inside. So there's some spots. Cirque out here in Las Vegas had them at like plus 112, the Nuggets, to win this series. I put a little on that. I just think that this Nuggets team has such a big advantage down low. They'll get Barton back at some point that they're going to be able to make it through a series like this. I thought they were going to win in about 7 games.
Jonathan Von Tobel joining us here on the Boardwalk on a hotline here on Sports Bash Saturday on 97.3 ESPN at JVT on Twitter. He is the host of the Hardwood Handicapers podcast. John, so let's go to tomorrow's games. Obviously, in this area, the huge deal here in South Jersey. Sixers, number 1 seed for the first time in 20 years. And that's where I'm going to start with you. Are people undervaluing home court advantage for the Sixers?
They could be, right? And maybe you can familiarize me with this. Do you know what they're doing with fans in terms of allowing them into the arena?
Yeah, it's going to be a little over 10,000, which will be about 50%.
Those are going to be big. The Knicks are allowing, I think, 15K into their building as well, for this first round. So that's going to be fascinating. We saw the home teams hold serve for the most part, right, in the play-in game, save for Memphis, who overcame the Golden State Warriors yesterday. But home court, I think, is going to be a little bit more important as we have now looked at this, season full of neutral courts and empty arenas. Now we're going to see the home teams, I think, have a little bit of an edge. And we know that historically in the last few years, Philly has been a really good home team. So I do think that when you look at Philly, I guess if they're being undervalued, I just don't really – I will say this. They were 3 weeks ago. Some shops had Philly as the third choice in the Eastern Conference in terms of the odds to win the East. That was ridiculous. They should have been the second choice. They are the second team in my power ratings behind Brooklyn. There's not that much difference between them because Philly plays immaculate defense, right? They have multiple wing defenders, whether it's Ben Simmons, whether it's going to be Danny Green, whether it's going to be T. Slybel, third best team in terms of force and turnovers in the NBA defensively. Like there's so much that this team has working with it. And even in a series like against Brooklyn, right? That would be a really tough series for Brooklyn, mainly because they have the wing defenders to throw out there. And on top of that, they have an interior presence in Joel Embiid, who Brooklyn really has no matchup for, right? Like in size, DeAndre Jordan can match up with him. But in terms of skill set and what he's going to have to do defensively, it's a really big mismatch. So I think if people are saying that Philly has no shot to get out of the Eastern Conference, if you don't believe that they have any chance against Brooklyn, I would say you're incorrect. I believe that Brooklyn wins that series, but that's like a 7-game series written all over it, 6-game series where Joel Embiid and the Philadelphia 76ers are going to be an extremely tough out against a team like the Brooklyn Nets.
Also in this area, a lot of people talk about the head coaching situation. Brett Brown was here last year. Doc Rivers is here now. How much value do you or don't you put onto who the head coach is for a team in the playoffs? Like, for example, Doc, championship experience. Steve Nash, no coaching experience in the postseason. Budenholzer, been to the playoffs, hasn't been to the finals. So how do you, gauge how the coaches, their value in all this?
Oh, I think they're extremely valuable, right? You mentioned a couple. Let's talk about Miami and Milwaukee, for example. I think there's a massive coaching edge in favor of Miami. I think Mike Budenholzer has shown that he has an inability to adjust his game plans, specifically defensively. And when things start to go haywire, there's just no change from Milwaukee in terms of what they do. We saw that with Atlanta when he was in control of that team, right? Those seasons ago when they had top seeds of the Eastern Conference and did nothing with them. So I think coaching matters greatly. And in a matchup, it's funny, with Philadelphia, I think there is some real criticisms of Doc Rivers in terms of the way he's handled things, right? We saw them blow the 3-1 series lead, all the stats leading up to that. I think he made some questionable choices in terms of his lineups that he was using in those series as well, continuously throwing out Montrezl Harrell against Nikola Jokic, who was just absolutely destroying him on a possession basis. So I think there is inherent edges, and they're very important in a lot of these series. But having said that, you mentioned the big thing, we're talking Philly and Brooklyn. The edge would still go to Doc, even though you think he's flawed, because we just don't know what Steve Nash is yet, especially in a lot of these situations. I think there's been positives for Nash. I think one of the things that Nash does, which you would think is very common, but it's not in the NBA, smart game management type things, like fouling up three late in games, things like that. He has shown the ability to do so, but we don't know anything about him. So I would say, one, yes, coaching is a massive edge if you can find it with a lot of these teams, and the other is between those two, you got to give Doc the edge a little bit there because he's been there and done that, and we don't know that much about Nash yet.
Of course, the Sixers versus Wizards tomorrow, 1 o'clock, right here on 97.3 ESPN. Following that game, we got here on 97.3 ESPN, Lakers, Suns. And Jonathan, when I look at that series, I know a lot of people are taking the Lakers, but I don't think people can just dismiss the Suns out of hand. I mean, Chris Paul has had a great year. If Devin Booker gets on fire, I don't know who the heck is stopping him with the Lakers. This feels like this is going to be a much tighter, closer series than people realize.
So I think I'm fascinated by this, and this is one of my pieces that I wrote this week about the postseason, things to look for, and the Suns were kind of the focal point of one of them because at the beginning of the year, one of the teams that frustrated me the most was Phoenix because I didn't think they were going to be this good. I didn't think they were going to be bad. I thought they were going to be a playoff team. I just didn't see second seed and top 5 defense in the NBA. And that's exactly what they were in the first half. But very quietly in the second half, they have regressed immensely defensively. They finished the second half 21st in overall defensive efficiency. Their rim defense, one of the worst in the NBA, giving up nearly 67% to opponents on the season. They are the worst transition defense in the NBA, 30th by a mile in terms of guarding teams in the fast break. And the thing that the Lakers like to do, right, when they're at full strength, when AD and LBJ are out there, they are a team that attacks the rim, that uses their size to attack the glass. They're a get out and transition and run type of team. Just all these things that the Lakers like to do and do well, and what they've done under Frank Vogel are things the Suns have really struggled with here this season and in the second half. And that's what really bothers me here with the Phoenix Suns. They're a really solid team. Chris Paul has done a fantastic job, as is Devin Booker. You mentioned them. They're both elite mid-range scorers. Outside of them, though, their depth, I think, is a little shaky from an offensive standpoint, and the Lakers don't really have a lot to deal with either. But, if you look at just the inherent advantages that the Lakers have, I think this is actually a tough series for the Phoenix Suns to make it out of. I thought the Lakers were going to win in 6, and this has been one of the more fascinating series prices. We saw this open as high as minus 250 in favor of Los Angeles. It got down to minus 145, 130 in some spots. And now we're back up to minus 180, 185. So I think the value there was betting Lakers minus 140, 145, 150. Now it's kind of reached to the point where it should probably be right where it's at. But I can't wait to watch it. I do think the Lakers win, but it's a fascinating series, one of the more fascinating ones we're going to see.
Another interesting series also is tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Knicks, Hawks. Obviously, the Hawks turned around their series midway through with the firing of Lloyd Pierce, bringing in Nate McMillan. And to me, I think the guy who should be coach of the year is Tom Thibodeau. I mean, how on earth is this team the 4 seed? I have no stinking idea. But they got them playing hard. Julius Randle's playing well. How do you lay out this series?
Yeah, 14-20 under Lloyd Pierce, right, for Atlanta, and then 27-11 under McMillan. They've been great. And I bet Atlanta. I laid a little bit at minus 120. It's moved in that direction. I think we're 135 now in most markets. But there's a couple of things, right? And the Knicks were undefeated against Atlanta. It should be immediately pointed out there. But Lloyd Pierce was the head coach for 2 of those games. Bogdan Bogdanovic missed a game. Danilo Gallinari missed 2. And then very famously, the final game between these two in the regular season, Trae Young and the Hawks are up 8. He goes down with a serious ankle injury, doesn't return, and they end up losing that game in overtime. So I think there's some nuance to why those games went down the way that they did. But I think overall, the Hawks have so many versatile lineups to put out there offensively. Traditionally big to attack the glass with Clint Capella. They can go small ball with 5 shooters at any one point, right, with a John Collins type. Like, there's so much they can do offensively. There's so much versatile offensive talent on this team that I think it's going to be a problem for New York. And I think the other part of this is, and this is one of my little favorite stats too, is the Knicks have, for lack of a better term, been getting kind of lucky if you look at some of the tracking data. They have given up the 3rd most wide open attempts from beyond the arc of any team in the NBA, and yet they are second in opponents shooting on wide open attempts. So you're giving up these wide open looks, and yet they're not going down, shooting at about 33, 34%. In a best-of-7 series, if you're going to continuously give up the same open looks to the same team, that's game plan, man. That's mismatch hunting, and they're going to start to find those, and they're going to start to hit those. It's been one of the better three-point shooting teams since Mill has taken over. So I like the Hawks. I rate them as the 4th best team in the Eastern Conference. I think they're going to win that series, so I did bet them to win it. New York's been awesome. I have a ticket on Randall to win Most Improved. I hope he really does. It looks like he's going to, but I think the Knicks story ends here in the first round.
Very, very interesting. Finally, I'm not going to ask you if the Memphis Grizzlies are going to beat the Jazz, because I don't think anybody in the right mind thinks that, despite the fact that last night was an amazing, fun game to watch. I mean, if you don't love watching, I put it on Twitter last night, if you don't love watching John Moran play basketball, you don't love basketball. So let's be realistic. But my question is, are the Jazz real? Can the Jazz be a legitimate number 1 seed with their 13,000 fans in attendance, or are the Jazz maybe a one-and-done situation? Are they a one-series win and then they're going to wilt in the next round, or can they make a legitimate deep run?
So I think they are real, and I think that the Lakers, for the most part, like, that'll be pretty tough, right? Like, that has 7-game series written all over it, because what the Jazz do from beyond the arc is absolutely incredible, right? Over 40% of their attempts from 3. They have over, I think it's like 39.8% on the season in terms of their 3-point shooting. They've been absolutely incredible. And so from an offensive standpoint, they're going to be a problem, I think, for the Los Angeles Lakers. The thing that ultimately, I think, holds Utah back, if they are the one and done that you're talking about, is from a defensive standpoint, well, across the board, they are absolutely great. If you look at them from a personnel standpoint, they have no true wing defender, right? Royce O'Neal is a really solid defender, but he gives up so much size and girth to a guy like LeBron James or a Kawhi Leonard if they move on and take on the Clippers in a Western Conference Finals. Bojan Bogdanovic is a good defender too, but he gives up a lot of speed to solid wing players like those two. And so ultimately, when you're talking about those 2 series, which they're going to have to get through, right? They're probably going to have to get through the Clippers in the second round. They're going to have to get through a Los Angeles Lakers as well. Like, that is something that is going to be pretty tough for the Utah Jazz to get through twice. And that's the tough part about their path, is to make it to where they're at. They got to get through, more than likely, the 2 gargantuans in Los Angeles, and you never really want that as a team if you're competing for a title. It's why I think what the Clippers did were relatively smart, because you put off the Lakers until the final round if that's going to happen. So I think they're legitimate, but the path is extremely tough. But I don't think that takes away from their legitimacy. You know what I mean? Like, if you're going to lose to the 2 best teams in the Western Conference, there's no slight on what you have done as a team. I ultimately don't think they make it out of the Western Conference, but I do think that they are the 3rd best team in the Western Conference, arguably the 2nd best team given the health of LeBron James and Anthony Davis.
He is Jonathan Von Tobel. He is the host of the Hardwood Handicapers podcast, also host on ESPN Las Vegas Radio. Follow him on Twitter at MEJVT. That's MeJVT on Twitter. And as all guests, he appeared with his awesome breakdown today on the Boardwalk kind of hotline. Jonathan, great stuff today. Appreciate you jumping on.
Of course, anytime. Thank you.